Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining episode 3 of our Dean's Fireside chat series. Tonight's episode affecting change with analytics in an online marketplace. I appreciate you all joining us for the conversation tonight, and I'm thrilled to have Mandy Plant with us. So Mandy is a proven leader with an exceptional track record in defining and delivering on complex business solutions through next generation technology platforms while developing and leading inspired teams through mentoring, coaching, and professional development. She's currently the Senior Director of Global Analytics at eBay, where she leads a global team of analysts and data scientists focused on uncovering insights from customer experiences that encompass over 380 million touch points a year. Before joining eBay, which is where I got a chance and the privilege of meeting Mandy, she spent over 10 years working for Dell, with her last role being focused in data strategy and enablement. And prior to that, she worked for Silicon Laboratories as an IT manager. So needless to say, Mandy's had a very successful career in the IT data and analytics space. And we are absolutely thrilled, Mandy, to have you here with us tonight. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I appreciate you having me as well.
So maybe to kick us off tonight and give our students and our alumni a little bit of background on who you are and how you moved from Silicon Laboratories to Dell to eBay and got into the analytics space. Could you just start off by telling us a little bit about your journey, maybe some of the milestones that you went through, and end with a little bit about your role as we start to dive into it?
Absolutely. Even though like you said, I lead a customer experience analytics team for eBay at the moment. My journey actually started in college. I'm probably one of the few people that went through and have a computer information science degree, and then actually ended up using that pretty quickly out of college, and then decided it stuck. So I actually worked for electronic data systems when I first got out of college. I was privileged enough to join their local instance here, which actually supported Texas Medicaid. At the time, they were the primary contractor for that for the state of Texas, and processing claims, looking at long-term care. Millions of underprivileged Texans utilize Texas Medicaid. So, one of the first things I did was actually part of the claims management system. It's actually a software development project. And then about a year after that, was fortunate one day to just kind of, look into the data world and start working with the data warehouse team, and figured out very quickly that my brain and data fit very nicely together. So ended up working on the first data warehouse project for long-term care data for the state of Texas. And so that's all of the community care facilities, nursing providers, that segment, mental health, mental retardation providers for the state, anything that requires someone to stay in a facility for an extended period of time. And so they'd never brought that data together, and I was fortunate enough to work on that project and code things literally with a black screen and white letters. There was no GUI, there wasn't anything else. It was just, okay, we're going to use C, we used a tandem system, which I don't even know if they still exist. I'm sure they probably do, but from there, just kind of worked through that for a number of years. And then along the way, Texas Medicaid actually changed their requirements for their contractors. And so with that, EDS had held the contract for like 25 years with the state, and ended up losing the contract to Accenture. And originally was going to create a technology support center for all of us software engineers at the time, or systems engineers, because they had Medicaid contracts in 16 other states. That lasted for about 2 months. I went out on maternity leave to have my daughter, and along the way learned I was laid off because that didn't work very well. And so literally a month later, in the actual physical paper, I found the job that I ended up with, which is at Silicon Labs, which is Silicon Laboratories here in Austin, Texas, which is a fabulous semiconductor company. I was actually hired to build their first generation data warehouse. Me, myself, and I as one person. And the crazy thing was that their data was actually small enough that that was possible. So even though they had been around since the late 90s as a company, very much a growth company, I think when I started, they had like 100,000 invoices to date from their inception. So it was like, it was small enough that you could be really creative and do things with it, but it was impactful, and you could do everything that you did was like, oh my gosh, you can bring these things together and bring visibility to things. And they decided to implement SAP about 6 months after I started. So it was one of those of, okay, I can learn SAP or I can find a new job. So I decided stay. I had a 10-month-old at the time, so I had to stay and learned SAP. Ended up leading the business warehouse platform, which is the BW, which is SAP's data warehouse component, and then also the portal and part of the CRM team. Again, small company, smaller companies, about 1,000 people at the time. So you have a small core group of IT folks, which I was in IT at the time, that covers a broad space. So I was fortunate to be able to have exposure to really all the points across, any kind of an ERP system journey. We implemented pretty much everything except for HR all at once. It took us about almost 3 years to develop and implement it. Did that, ended up leading the ABAP team along the way, which is SAP's proprietary coding language. And so, and then, along the way, I was there for 5 or 6 years, and then eventually kind of ended up with 3 jobs as one person. That's what you get for being efficient and understanding all the different complicated pieces. And so ended up applying for and getting a job at Dell in 2010, and went there. Originally started working on customer care and fraud, was hired to lead the BI team for them for Dell Financial Services. And my first exposure to working with offshore teams for BI and for data analytics. I'd worked with them a little bit for whenever we were doing SAP implementation at Silicon Labs, but from an ongoing, just having my own staff there, not having contractors or other things, and just having teams in multiple places. It's my first exposure to that. And then, Dell, as you know, is a massive company, and so every kind of ELT organization within it kind of functions as its own company. So you had DFS kind of functioned by itself, and then you had Core Dell, which was you had the different product teams for end user computing versus storage versus sales and sales operations, finance, other things, supply chain. And then moving across to Core Dell on software and peripherals and user computing, ended up in sales and sales operations support, which is where I ended up working on EMC integration with Joe. And then ultimately ended up going across to the services organization, which is where they focusing on client deployment, warranty services for individuals, kind of everything you could possibly think of. They're much more of a, what kind of data do we need to capture? What can we do with it? How can we use it to start giving agents, next best action recommendations when they're on the phone with a customer? Really getting more into process and control and data, more sophisticated data analytics and algorithms to feed back information to the customer. And it's this technology evolved along the way. And then I ended up here at eBay right at the beginning of the pandemic. I started actually my interview process was literally right when everything shut down. So I actually never went into an office that was full of people. Everything that I did was on Zoom, which I'm sure many of you can relate. And I did all my onboarding, started in June of 2020. So I've been there just over 2.5 years. And I lead, like I said, I lead customer experience analytics globally. So I have teams. Most of my team is actually a little over half of it is in Dublin, Ireland. And then I have another big chunk in Salt Lake City. I have some analysts here in Austin, some analysts in San Jose, where eBay is headquartered. And so, we within eBay, the help site, there's kind of core product is how we refer to it, which is your core ebay.com or various sites across the globe. And then there's the help component of that, which is either help.ebay.com or any of the support panels. Everything from that point forward is what my team and I focus on. So we get about 360-ish, at this point anyway, million active sessions on the help side a year. And then there's an additional percentage, somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 million contacts that go into an actual teammate in a call center or a contact center worldwide. And so from all of that, we live and breathe big data. There's no other way. So even within customer experience, I think we have there's somewhere around between the technology team that supports it, which is like our IT team, and then the business operations team for GCX itself is about 600 or 700 people, and then we have about 8,000 agents globally that we refer to as teammates. So that support all of anything and everything that a customer would contact for. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's been meandering, right? I mean, there's never a linear path for a career, but all of mine have been fortunate to be in the data and analytics and technology space, and figured out a long time ago that I think in terms of data, and if you can figure out where the data goes, you can answer any question you can find. So.
Geez, after that, Mandy, I feel like I need to applause like that. That was so impressive, and it really highlights the fact that as you're navigating your career path, you're really going to make it your own. And,
Yeah,
some of it's serendipity, and some of it is just working your butt off to be able to upskill and be able to do what you need to do, like when you learned SAP, for example. And I was really smiling when you said you had enough data to fit kind of in one database or even an Excel sheet, the 100,000 rows. And
yeah,
by the time you got into Dell and then eBay and just when you start bringing historicals in, right, you're in the
yeah.
billions or trillions of records with the combinations. It's a completely different expansion of skill set and a different way of looking at it at that point. So what I'm really curious about is, given that you've had this breadth from the 100,000 rows to the 360
One
million-ish
spreadsheet.
interactions, which I was a part of that data set, by the way, and I had a great customer service experience with eBay, so thank you. Um, you can find me somewhere in
Okay.
there. I'm curious, how has your definition of analytics evolved over the years? Like, if you think about the first time you heard analytics and what your thoughts were versus what it is now after all these different roles and all the different experiences that you've had, what are some of the components of that, or how might it have changed?
I think it was more just less known and less thought of that way. I think you've always got like problem solving, and to me, it's so much of what we do is problem solving, and it's a puzzle. You're always trying to put together the puzzle of whatever question it is that you're trying to answer or whatever decision you're trying to help enable. It's all a puzzle of trying to get the data to fit together and make sense of itself. And I think it's all of those things existed before. It just didn't really get called as, oh, we have this analytics group. We have a
Mhm.
set of people that's what their focus is. It was kind of a portion of, I think, of more of IT specific, or even sometimes in the business, but it wasn't really like, oh, I'm going to have a group that just focuses on that. What I've seen change over the years is just that it's more of there is a more refined skill set as you get into larger data sets, as you get into different technologies to deal with those larger data sets. It's not that, I always joke, it's like data science didn't just get created. It existed. It just, we didn't call it that. It was computer science with statistics and large data. Um, Now it's just, there's so much refinement and very much, specific focus on it that, it has morphed into its own thing that kind of stands by itself. And so I think, that's probably the biggest change is just, having it be isolated and having it be a focused skill set that you can actually develop a career path forward to and have it as an end, as opposed to just something that was like, oh yeah, this just kind of gets done on the side. It's such an important component for companies, to have. And, I've not met anyone from any company that's not trying to build or improve their existing analytics capability in some way or, some form or fashion, whether that's a small company that I have friends that work at, or if that's, our global enterprise companies.
So I think that's a great point. And, we like to think, statistics, computer science, like business, all these competencies were there. In a lot of ways, it's just how have those things come together to be able to support the growing need and application that you have from these large data sets, or in some cases, very small data sets too.
Right.
Right. So part of this definition, though, and a lot of folks sometimes get confused on this, is the role of BI and reporting within that definition, or whether or not it should be completely pulled out of the definition in the first place. And it starts getting us into this whole conversation around how do you delineate between reporting and analytics? So I'm
Yeah.
curious, with your experiences, whether you want to touch on Dell, eBay, both, or something else, how do you delineate between those?
Well, I'll give you, I can definitely give you some experience of what we have, what we have in place at eBay. Actually, I would say is probably the cleanest definition and the cleanest delineation between those groups that I've ever seen.
Okay.
And I think it's been very purposeful from that perspective of recognizing that, reporting is needed for every industry. It's like you have to understand what's going on in your business. You have to understand what metrics are changing day over day to go be able to adjust and make difference, make different decisions or whatever you need to do to be able to move your company forward and make sure that you're moving towards your strategy or path. I feel like those are things that are more static. They're easily consumable. Usually it's like you have to have some amount of standardization in the metrics, of course, but it is more like it is report the news. It's like what happened today, what happened yesterday, what happened a month ago, what happened 6 months ago or a year ago. And I think that has to exist regardless. I think where it starts to morph and, even actually with both Dell, actually all of the companies and even going into, especially here at eBay, what we make the delineation of where it goes into what we would consider more of the analytics and eventually data science as well if you're crossing multiple data sets together, if you're trying to meld, not just, hey, I'm looking at this every day, it's trying to figure out what happened. It's trying to figure out what happened yesterday and what can we expect in the future? Can we predict? Can we be proactive? Can we understand even what happened? Because sometimes, even though it's in arrears, it's not obvious what happened. We have so many things in our ecosystem at eBay that changed, and so many different, we have rules, we have, both sides of the marketplace, which adds complexity no matter what you do. It's trying to support both buyer and seller in every transaction. And so things happen. And so sometimes it's like when something might get introduced in the ecosystem and no one downstream knows, right? And then we automatically in the call center and contact center see volumes go up, things change, patterns shift, and it's like, wait, what just happened? And we're trying to go and connect the dots to figure out what happened. And then how do we, then, hey, if this continues or if this changes, what happens next? So it's that predictive and anticipation of going across multiple things is where we start to delineate, as opposed to just, like reporting is, it's not just reporting. It is just reporting, but it's required. And it's like, I think reporting is kind of, table stakes for moving into a data centric environment, and analytics is building off of that.
I think it's a great point. And, as I was thinking about that, there were two things that come to mind. One, COVID in itself, to kind of emphasize that point. And I know you were entering eBay at the beginning, but I got to imagine that with folks being home a little bit more time on their computers, they were probably on the online marketplace and the bidding platform a little bit more than in the past, and their buying behaviors probably shifted a little bit. And like many companies, all the models you had built, some of them were not that relevant anymore.
Yeah, patterns changed a lot. Training sets changed a lot. And actually, even I'll tell you, even from a customer experience perspective, pre-COVID, in the US, 93% of our volume went through the phone. Direct dial IVR, direct people just picking up the phone if they had a problem calling. Well, then you have COVID happen. People can't get into the office. Things are shut down. People can't go into a physical office. You have offshore, onshore, nearshore. You have every realm of where teammates are actually located to answer customer questions. It went almost immediately off, switched to email, back to chat, and then came back slowly. And so all of that, it's like almost all of your historicals weren't relevant anymore because you couldn't predict. And so we spent a ton of time with that pivot, trying to figure out, okay, what can we anticipate if we do this? If we make these small changes over here, and everything in our world is by topic, it's by what your problem is, we might send you to a different place.
Right.
So if you need to change your password, you're having trouble doing that on the site, and you end up trying to contact us because you need help with it, we might send you to one set of different type of teammates, location, language, depending on what it is. If you have a complicated, I didn't get my item, it got lost in the mail, I'm trying to get the seller to respond to me, the seller's not responding, the buyer's not responding, or it's a fraudulent case. It's a very different set of skills depending on how you want to interact with the customer, anything like that. So how all of that gets routed and debated and determined, whether you put the bot in front of it, whether they encounter just a direct phone call because it's that bad, and we know that that's an emotive topic and it should go there. All of those things are different things that we had to kind of figure out anew, and then we're still morphing into, actually. Still trying to change and figure out, what is customer preference, what is the optimal for different demographics, different price points, different locations, different countries have different patterns. So all of that, just trying to, it completely flipped with COVID, and it's just kind of continued to morph and morph and morph. And so we have never a dull moment, never a lack of work, for sure. Trying to figure out, how to help our operational partners make better decisions.
Well, just goes to show you the importance of agility in a lot of this, right?
For sure.
And being able to look.
Get stuck in but we've done it this way, we've always done it this way, or hey, we tried that and that didn't work. Well, the paradigm has shifted. So it's like nothing is valid anymore. You almost have to test it to be sure.
Well, I'm glad from the customer service experience that we had you behind everything at eBay to be able to get us through everything in COVID there. So the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking through, you said reading the news at one point. And I remembered back, somebody at some point in my career told me the difference between analytics and BI is the difference between news readers and news makers. So I want to transition a little bit to the last Fireside chat that we had with Cindy Howson, who is the chief data strategy officer at ThoughtSpot. And we had a great conversation around self-service analytics platforms and kind of democratizing the data and the analytics back to the business to enable them to be more self-sufficient and get things more on demand. And a lot of our students followed up with questions on, well, what does that mean for the role of the data analyst going forward? Now, to me personally, I actually see fireworks. I think this is exciting
Yeah.
because when I think about Dell and EMC before that and others, data analysts were so often pulled into this responsibility to deliver data and pull reports and pull queries and deliver Excel. And you never actually analyzed anything.
Right.
And if we can actually democratize the data in such a way, we can free the data responsibly, that actually enables our analysts to analyze. So, two questions for you. One, what are your thoughts about the future of data analysts and what that role entails? And then I'd love to talk a little bit about democratizing data and freeing data and what you or eBay are doing to do that responsibly as you give it out to the masses there.
Yeah. I'll actually start with the second question first, which is just, as you noted, it's always a big topic of how much data do you give people access to,
Right.
how much can they be trusted with? I mean, as you recall, it's like, every company has a different strategy. Dell, even in EMC had very different strategies about how they enable data. You know, so whenever I got to eBay, I was actually quite surprised. It's like we have actually pretty open with democratization of data to the analyst community. So not to necessarily the broad population of the company, but as an analyst, we're not putting roadblocks up in front of you to be able to look at data and combine it with other things, even if it's something that's not even in your space. It's something still within. If you're in the analyst community, you've got a community to reach out to, and you've got you're able to access the data and work with it. But what has been interesting to me about that is like you see a lot more creativity. I think of just opening of like, hey, let me think about this a different way. If I'm trying to answer, trying to solve a problem, or I'm trying to look at something and figure out, hey, what's the value of this, or what's the impact of this? I can think about anything and everything in the environment and in the ecosystem, not just, oh, well, I can only look at these things because this is all I have access to, because I can't really get that because that person, this one, they want to do this, or they want to do this. And so I think it opens up a lot of creativity as far as what you're able to do as an analyst and as a data scientist, as you're working through algorithms and bringing different data sets and things. So from that perspective, it's been like the opposite end of the spectrum from multiple of my prior companies. Now we do it, like I said, back to it is, doing it responsibly and just, making sure that, everybody is expected, there's a level of standards we're expected to pull to, and, you do have to, authenticate yourself 10 times a day sometimes, but it's all integrated to your Apple Watch or whatever, if you want it to be. So you can do it quickly, but I mean, it's just making sure that you're accessing what you should be accessing and all of those things, but they let you, you're able to do it. So back to like, how does that then connect to even like how the data analyst functions and what that role looks like and what self-service does to that? We actually, in customer experience, have a pretty good self-service environment and have for a while as far as just kind of core operational information and data. We entrust our regional counterparts and that are in those operational teams in the markets to be able to look at their data for their space. They look at their data every day. They know what to do with it. Anytime that it goes across other things, my team and others will get involved. But on the product side, on the core eBay side, it's actually a journey that we're working through at the moment, just more broadly, to enable self-service to more people that haven't had that environment where even a consistent set of metrics was available for kind of self-service, just understanding. And so we are moving actively in that direction of just enabling internal tools for them to be able to do some things themselves to free up analyst time more than anything else, because the demand for the analyst, the data analysts, the business analysts, when I say business analysts, it's more of they're almost like technical business analysts, people who are very much SMEs in the data, SMEs in the processes, but are also still writing SQL, writing programs, and pulling data together. And then we have everything from, obviously, PhD data scientists working on it as well. But it's honestly more of a strategy to free up their time to have them focus on the bigger problems and the more complicated things. Whereas if we can enable, and obviously people have to know the data, you have to have some concept of how the process works and what the data looks like to be able to make sense of it. Otherwise, you're going to get bad answers and bad things. So we have actually whole data literacy programs that are also being stood up to help enable self-service and make sure whenever we say self-service and our stakeholders hear self-service that we're actually speaking the same language. So a lot of work around that to make sure that, like you said, it's done in a responsible way and that they're able to get things that are quick and without having to take an expensive resource and more technically trained resource out of their more complicated things, for lack of a better
Right.
explanation, and be able to kind of do some of that and prioritize the rest. So then I'll come back to the data analyst one, which is they are not going away anytime soon. They're just, it's like I see them as just, it's the core of connecting the business information and connecting business process and just how the business functions with the technology and the data and what it means. And so being able to bridge that gap and say, okay, here I understand what's happening in the business, I understand the business logic of what's happening, and then I can look at the data and go, oh, let me pull insights out of that. Like, oh, if you look at this, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And then now let's go do other things with that. And here's some recommendations for what we might look at next, or how we might change X, Y, or Z. That skill set and that kind of translation between the business and technical, and then even along that spectrum is actually underserved very broadly, in my opinion.
So there were so many gold nuggets and everything that you just said there, Mandy. And the one that I want to poke at in particular that I think is really interesting is when you're talking about data literacy, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for our students and our alumni and others that are watching on this, whether it's the recording or live right now, to realize that while you all may be trained in this and you understand the data and the math and the models and you've had this exposure, many of the folks that you will be working with, many of your stakeholders and your end customers have no idea what you're talking about.
It's a different language. They look at it and just go, I have no idea. The words came out, I heard them, don't know what it means. I mean, very much. And I mean, at least some of the ones I deal with now, I work with a great group of people, and they will just look at me and go, okay, can you like translation?
Well, and I think it's important then for students to realize that, while you understand it, you're going to find ways to communicate it effectively in a way that doesn't end up alienating folks,
right,
and gets them to
dropped on deaf ears because they don't understand the goal that you're bringing them, because you can't communicate it in a way that's that's internalized and received.
So I'm thrilled that eBay has these data literacy programs to try to help with that, right? And again, it's not necessarily boiling it down to a kindergarten level. It's just trying to educate folks around the company around what is data, what is analytics, and what are you trying to do to use it effectively. So you talked about this translation skill then. So I'm curious, and you started talking about the data analyst and what you expect. What are some of these key skills that you're looking for on your teams and teams like yours across eBay that our students and alumni should be aware of?
I think it is, like I mentioned, that being able to understand the business process and then be able to look at the data and kind of see how they flow. It's a lot of dot connecting, in my opinion, but as far as the data and analytics itself. But then once you figure out something, it's like you can figure it out as an analyst and a technologist. Because like you said, it is what we're trying to do. We spend lots of time looking at, but then getting that to be able to then communicate that through a storytelling or a PowerPoint, or giving a verbally, even in a presentation, to help someone understand, okay, when you see this, that if you follow this, it's almost like a logical path of being able to walk someone through communication and communication, storytelling, pictures, slides and pictures and slides, or whatever it may be, to be able to walk them logically through the thought process of, here's how I got from A to Z, and here's how I came to this conclusion. I feel like what I see more than anything is I see a lot of people who come out as new college grads or early workforce that are very, very technical, or very, very specific, like marketing, or the philosophy of theology marketing, or very specific business things, or accounting, or things like that, but not a lot that are able to be super technical and then go back and bridge that across to a business process, or to understand, like, okay, even connect marketing and super technical. We have a ton of things around marketing and analytics and offsite, onsite, and all the impressions versus what actually translates to revenue and how you bridge all of that together. It's a huge skill to be able to understand all of the technical things, but then to be able to tell that story back to someone who doesn't understand the technical, and really get them to internalize, oh, hey, this is a big deal, I need to pay attention, or this is really bad, I need to go make some adjustment. But getting that message across without them having to go down the technical, bunny trail, if you will, with you, I think is, it is, I would actually argue, a huge gap in what I see from candidates that come in to interview and discuss with us. And then but an opportunity for those of you, going through the process now to increase your skill set.
Well, I'm
Actually,
excited.
I've even developed learning plans for my own team. Actually, back to kind of some of the things you said earlier. It's like I'm always focused on just core development. And you're never static in your career and in what you're doing. It's you always have to be improving, whether that's leadership or technical or otherwise. And so, we put together, plans for the same thing. Very much what you're talking to your students about of, how storytelling with data, visualization. Where there's better, there are good and bad visualizations for different data sets that you're trying to bring forward and show someone. Some things work, sometimes, all of it works. It's technically possible, but how it's received on the other end and whether it actually lands with a person that doesn't understand it all is definitely a different skill.
Well, I'll give a public service announcement to build off of that for our students and alumni. If you're going into a meeting with business stakeholders, do not show them the output of your regression. Do not show them your R code. Do not show them your Python code. Do not tell them about the p-values. Unless your audience has statisticians or analytics people in it, which happens. I did that mistake once. I don't know if there's somebody who you may have worked with in the past, Mandy, but I went into a meeting once where I stripped all that out, and it turned out that the executive I was presenting to had a PhD in computer science from MIT. And we ended up opening up my SAS code at the time. And that's when I learned the important lesson of go on LinkedIn and find out who you're talking about before you go into these meetings.
Understand your audience. Present to your audience.
But with the exception of that audience, you need to figure out how to pull the meaningful things from that output and be able to tell a story that, again, is not going to alienate folks that have never seen Python, never seen R, never seen SAS, never seen Statistica, never seen MATLAB, even Excel sometimes can throw people off.
It's amazing what some people can do with Excel.
Excel can be magic, and I do use it, so I'm not all about coding, but
it's the most common BI tool in the world, and I'm not a fan, but it's never going away. So I'm pushing, along the journey with it.
So before I ask you your final question, I just wanted to the folks that are on live listening right now, we will have an opportunity for Q&A in a couple of minutes. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx of the webinar, there's a little Q&A button there. And if there's a question that you have for Mandy or myself or any of us really, feel free to drop it in and we'll have a chance to ask Mandy those questions very shortly. So the last question I want to tie back to is something that we had talked about when we were connecting earlier in the week. So when you have 360 plus million touch points that are happening in the service experience, I really would love to hear more about how you think about managing trust and safety on eBay's platform, which I know you very passionately talked to me about earlier in the week. And I think it's really interesting, especially in the context of removing friction from customer experience, knowing that most of the people on this call, I would posit, have used eBay at some point. So care to share any thoughts on that, Mandy?
Sure. Trust and safety. Actually, I mean, it's a huge deal, and honestly, it's like, I mean, it goes so far, which to people internally that no one calls customer service to say thank you. So
I will next week, Mandy.
Okay, I'll look for it. Generally speaking, it's like, you have all these things, people are looking for help, they have a problem. And it's something that's happened on the site, whether that's, they encountered, something fraudulent, they didn't get their item, it was late, they couldn't figure out how to pay, they have a problem with their credit card, it could be anything. So as far as like how to, it's actually I'd say a constant initiative. I think it morphs slightly, like what the focus is within it, but improving trust and safety on the platform is, chief order number one almost every year that I've been here. And like I said, it tends to morph a little bit every year, but and I think the reason why, it's so important to build, customer value and customer stickiness and all of those things, but it's also a huge challenge. Just, back to the, we have this massively complex ecosystem with, billions of rows of data across the board. And, if someone's on, we have whatever, 2.5 billion transactions a year or something like that.
Just a few.
You have to, just a few. And having both the buyer and seller side of that, you have to have policy in place to protect both buyer and seller. So how do you, how are we enabling, a person who's a new seller to come on the side as a small business or a customer or just an individual consumer like yourself? And hey, I decided I want to sell something. How do we make sure that they're going to have a good experience and they're gonna have a good experience both listing and selling and getting their payments. And then on the buyer side of it, how do you know whenever you look at something, you're going to search for something, how do you know that what you're getting is what you're expecting? And so what we end up with is we actually have a number of just different, we have rules engines, we have algorithms, we have just data touch points that we're constantly trying to improve and enhance to make sure that we're catching the bad things and leaving the good things alone. It's not perfect, obviously. It's like actually, have a really good, example, just even a very practical example of a current one of this, where we're constantly trying to figure out, to catch people who are fraudulent before they actually impact a true member or a valued member that's on the platform. People who are trying to scam people and other things. And so, you have a whole set of rules taking different pieces of data that are trying to find based on, all kinds of, could be location, could be, previous history on the site, could be a number of things. But trying to look at that and then anticipate, okay, is this person bad or good? Should I block them? Should I not block them? Occasionally good people get blocked and end up having to call customer service to get themselves unblocked. But so we're actually, that's, like I said, very much a real time, always trying to, we get those, not quite every day, but there's ongoing just projects and okay, this is, we're catching too many, as we almost refer to dolphins, we're catching too many people that shouldn't be caught. How do we refine this? So we'll look at it, look at the different data sets, pull that back into those rules teams to feed back into their algorithms, and almost have this, an analytics feedback loop to help them train and understand their models that then help us get, analyze like the other things on our side, on the service side. It just is kind of a symbiotic ecosystem of insights and feedback. But the real way to build trust and safety is we have to be consistent. We have to make sure that we're getting as much of the bad things off the platform. There's processes in place to identify counterfeits. There's processes in place to identify rights violations, things that you can't post on, you can't list for sale. There's things in different countries. There's different things, unrest that happens in the U.S. There's the whole situation with Ukraine. There's things with Russia. There's things with all of Black Lives Matter. All of these different things that happen. We end up having putting rules in place and different things of what you can sell on the platform, what you can't sell on the platform. All of the different rules around trying to make sure that stays as consistent and member friendly as possible, but enabling a good experience as they go. So it's hugely complicated, but it's like, I hate to use that word. I used to one of my prior executives at Dell actually was referred to that as don't tell me it's complicated. We pay you to deal with complexity, which is true. But in the case of in the case of the data ecosystem, it's a whole nother level of things to try to understand when you have not only both sides of the transaction, but also all of the payment processing, customer service, all of the financial pieces of that, plus the experience of a member on site just searching. So it is, kind of like I said, chief goal number one is to improve trust and safety always, and then improve the customer experience as we go.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the insights there. And there were two things that I started to pick up on. One, the importance of business rules. So even if you have the data and you have the model, you have to be able to integrate business rules where it makes sense, which may be legally binding, maybe ethically oriented.
Yeah, regulatory, you've got compliant, you've got just do the right thing for the person. And we have eBay make it, eBay money back guarantee, eBay make it right policies as well, to ensure people are comfortable shopping on the platform. So all of it back to business rules, and there's got to be logic and process and why something should work or shouldn't.
So the other thing I was thinking about too is the importance of false positives versus false negatives. So in the case of where you're building some of these models to detect fraud or suspicious activity, you almost want to prioritize the false positives, even though the model's flagging it, and you may catch some good fish in there to be able to prevent some of these other things from happening. It's a risk and a cost that you need to take on in some kind of an eloquent way.
Yeah, it's I can give you actually a good example of one that happened to me directly, as I was just actually when I first started eBay. I was like, I hadn't used eBay in a number of years, I'll be honest. I have used it before, but then I was like, hadn't been on platform, went to go,
life happens.
Just trying to play with it. What's that?
Life happens.
So. Life happens, yes. Children and other things, just life happens. So I went, on the platform, started a listing, didn't actually post it, just started a listing, saved it as a draft. was moving around the site, and within 15 minutes, my account was suspended. And I was like, I get, this email like, your account's suspended, we were trying to keep this platform safe, blah, blah, blah. And, it was one of those where I was like, what just happened? I know enough from a systems perspective. Okay, a person didn't do this. Like there's something systematic that I've hit, in whatever I was doing. So I reached out to our, one of our voice customer teams to like, hey, can you help me figure this out? And it turned out, we actually have mass registration rules where, there are, entities in other countries, even in those other places that will sit there and try to mass create fake accounts. And there's different, there's a pattern for that. And they're looking at, your location versus your IP address versus your internet provider versus where your traffic is coming from. There's all of these different kinds of components that, if you're trying to look at all those together, that there's a certain set of patterns that, 99.7% of the time is correct, that it's fraud. When you triangulate it all, that 0.03% or 0.3% is people like me who was like, I happen to be, I was on VPN. I live in a different state. My internet traffic through my provider was routed a certain way, and there's a whole set of other things that it just happened to line up, and so I got caught in a set of rules that suspended me for likely good reason. But it's an opportunity like, okay, well, is it good enough? Is it the risk that you take that you do suspend people that are good, from the perspective of you're preventing 99.7% of the bad things out there, and it's weighing that risk of and risk and reward of, okay, we know that we're not perfect, but how close do we need to be? And we are actually always striving to make it as little as possible, but it happens.
Well, congratulations on pressure testing your system.
Yeah.
Being able to learn from it. But that was a great example.
Makes sense. After they explained it to me, they told me, I have this list of things that I've, gotten captured in. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. You get to check mark on that one, right?
Yeah, it works. And, that was the answer I got back. I was like, it's right. 99.7%. It's like, noted. So, it's hard to argue with.
So we have a couple of questions that have come in to close us out. And the first one, and well, I definitely don't want you to share anything that's confidential with eBay, so you can figure out how you want to tackle this one or pass it back to me. So what are some of the most important techniques you've learned that are important to keep in mind when processing huge amounts of data to answer a question? Or maybe is there a particular methodology or way that you think about approaching it when it is a big data problem?
I think it's, well, at least in our case, one is, availability. Does what you're hunting for actually exist? Like, is it captured? Is it captured on site? There's a lot of things, we might encounter that they're not captured and stored in a way that are actually useful. we store a lot. But then there's the pivot of, is it, there's just storing it and having to do all the data prep for it versus to get to a point where it's usable versus, how much of it is already there. So we go through a lot of just kind of that assessment of how much of the data actually exists, what data points would we want to look at for what we're trying to do, and what technologies do we need to utilize based on the size of those things, how closely connected are there, do we need to use some clustering to try to pull things together and figure out what's in common or figure out what the patterns are, or
right.
Is it clean enough that it's just, hey, is there true cause and effect, or is it inconsequential? So it's more of just kind of looking at what the problem is and looking at what data points you would want to incorporate that at some point and figure out how clean that is, to then make the decisions of what types of methods to use. So no one answer to anything. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's why we have jobs, but it's, there's no one answer, but lots of different things to look at.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And, I'll add another public service announcement here when I have the microphone too. Don't overcomplicate things, right? A lot of times when folks dive into big data problems too, they're quick to want to do their back pocket techniques that they really enjoy, whether it's a random forest or XGBoost, or maybe you're using Facebook's profit algorithm or whatever it is, right? A lot of those things are extremely compute heavy. They're also really complicated to explain, back to the original point
that's
that I
what
was talking about.
Simplicity is key. I'll give you that.
I can remember so many times where a decision tree, just
Mhm.
a collection of if-then rules, was powerful enough to move the needle initially, to
Mhm.
get buy-in because they're easily explainable. And then later, once you get everybody singing from the same sheet of music, then you can start to introduce more complicated ML and AI techniques. You can start doing model competition networks.
Mhm.
You can really get complicated fast to be able to really tune that accuracy. But
Yeah.
you're probably also going from, say your decision tree is 85% accurate.
Yeah, I was
Those
gonna say
tuning,
80 to 90% directional gets you pretty far.
yeah, and the tuning's only going to probably bring you to 87 or 88%. If you get into the 90s, I actually think you probably did something wrong.
I
Right?
would question it, to be honest. It would make me
Yeah.
want to go back and look and go, wait, did I miss something?
Yeah, and that's
I
just because
do
there's so
miss
much
something.
volatility in the real world versus a controlled environment like academia, right? But I think
Exactly.
my point there is think about everything that Mandy talked about earlier about the ability to translate, communicate, and know that you are dealing with that in addition to the fact that if you're going to use those more advanced techniques, the framework in the design, the architecture for the AI is going to need you're going to need an engineer to think about that because if you're putting 400 million records through that, you're
Mhm.
going to catch your data center on fire unless unless you start thinking about how you're going to use your GPU and all that jazz. So just
No,
keep that in
that's
mind.
true.
The next question, which I love, so a lot of our students are working professionals. They tend to be a little bit older than what you would see in a brick and mortar school. So folks that are mid-career, midlife, things like that. So the question is, what would you recommend to an older student coming into data analytics later in career when it comes to interviewing with someone on your team, Andy? Or what skill sets would you highlight on a resume, knowing that you've had a career in potentially something else?
Okay. So one, I would actually still say age doesn't matter. Neither does gender.
Absolutely.
And I talked about this a little bit
Mhm.
as far as just the divide that I still see. But so I mean, it really doesn't. It's about what for me personally, it's about what you can do. It's about what is your experience, and I would actually argue, especially people who've had changed careers or have had a career, taking time off to do family, taking time off for other reasons, being a caregiver for some other reason, or doing something different, and then getting into it later. A lot of that experience and your practical, just common sense things that you've learned from other careers, it's very transferable. I'll go back to again, so much of what we do is critical thinking and problem solving. It's all puzzle. I come today every day, come to work every day. It's all puzzles. They're complicated puzzles sometimes, but it's putting things together. And I think those skills that you have just from your everyday and just being a professional and having some background and experience is very easily transferable to then you just are adding tools, adding things, skill sets to your toolkit. As you learn the more technical and technological pieces of data science or analytics or even just different data things themselves. And so for me, it's can you demonstrate what you can do? Do you understand how to apply it? Like if we give you a problem, can you explain to us how you would solve that? And it's logical and it makes sense. And the technology piece to me is much easier than teaching someone the thought process. If someone has the right thought process and can think about it logically, can think about it,
Mhm.
from a process perspective, A leads to B leads to C leads to D, and get to root cause, get to whatever. The any technology is, once you kind of have a skill set for a few, one or two of them, they're just slight tweaks to go to another. So that's what I would say. Don't be discouraged. And I'd say I would actually argue that if someone does have treat you differently because rather than that's their loss because I think it's we actually I can give you an example. We actually had there's a program at eBay that works with folks coming out of the military that are either just they've had a full military career and they're transitioning um, into just regular professional life and civilian life. And there's I interviewed someone to come to our team and he came on as an intern, and then we ended up converting to a full-time employee. But
Mhm.
he had done on the ground operations and cybersecurity for Afghanistan or something, and it was like, okay, I can all of the skills you had to use there. I live in an operational analytics world personally, and so it's like all of those things. It's like, okay, I can give you something and feel quite confident it's going to get done, and you're going to look at it very thoroughly, and you can look at all the different angles of it. Plus now you've got this technological skill set to even go take that extra level. So um, I would say, all of that is, to me is a positive when you go and try to interview with someone from a team. It's like, don't feel bad or be, hesitant to connect the two sets of experiences into why it's a positive for you.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And when I think about folks that come in with prior experience, that is an asset in every definition of it. And I had talked to one person who was in the career hunt who had a psychology undergrad and had worked in psychology before, who was actually thinking about leaving that off of their their resume for analytics. And as soon as I heard that, I started pulling my hair out because I'm like, oh my goodness, like you are a diamond in the rough here, because all of that experience, especially when you're thinking about translation and human behavior, is
Behavioral analytics, like, oh my gosh, here, please. Like, you know what to go look at and what to try to pull together.
But whether you do that, or you've been in logistics, or you've driven a truck, or you've been a bartender, or you are an English teacher, all of those things bring unique characteristics that make you you, and also start to differentiate you from the technical side. So when you start applying to some of these roles, a lot of times, there may be 50 people that have similar technical skills just like you. So then from the hiring manager, from Mandy, how do you pick then if the technical are table stakes? How do you differentiate which person you should bring for that interview and that person that you're ultimately going to hire? And your prior experience and your prior life experience is what differentiates you and gives you a competitive advantage. So I don't think it's a downside. I think it's a huge asset if you can tell the story.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree.
So last question, and this is actually from a faculty member who's on. There is a case study that's out there on how eBay implemented a conflict resolution system that handles 60 million issues, mostly using machine learning without human contact mediation. So I don't know if that was before or after your tenure in the last couple of years, but we discussed, so in the course, they discussed the questions that could be used in a system like that. And the faculty member is interested in what business questions could you put in place after that system goes into effect? Like, what would you be looking for if you are running that system on your team, you're monitoring it, and you're trying to understand impact? What are the kind of questions you'd be asking?
Well, let me ask this question. What are the type of questions that you would be asking as a person supporting it that might get contact from the people being handled by it, or something else? I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
Let's take it from the internal perspective. So whether you want to talk about it from an effectiveness or where it may need to be tweaked or modified in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely tell you. So that exists, still exists, morphs, obviously all the time. And what happens is there is an automatic resolution, and then there's an escalation path if there's a disagreement, right? So that escalation path comes into customer service. So we get all of the downstream from anything like that. And so I think actually that's what you almost get a bit of a constant learning and training of the model just from getting information back. That's what's being escalated, why is it being escalated, what's the information, what's that interaction like, what's the sentiment of that interaction. And that latter one, is one that we're working on more now, putting things in place to detect sentiment in a better way, to have that be also as a feed in. But I think all of those things are pieces of information that just get fed back in to just make it constantly evolving. And then there's just policy change. There's even approach change to like, what do you want to know more or less? And so there's that set of tweets coming from other parts of the business as well. Different regions, you might want to focus on a different way. Different policies or regulatory things change in different countries. So some of that stuff has to be also fed in and just kind of constantly changed and updated and have some amount of different resolution that comes out of that. But it is. I would say probably one of the more complicated ones, for sure. That and search, I'm continually amazed by all of the things that go behind the search engine. So the two of those are the big ones for us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for talking through that, Mandy. And I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here, so I know I'll turn it over to you for any concluding thoughts, anything that you want to leave our students or alumni with before we wish them well in the holiday season.
Yeah, I know. I'm just super excited for you guys to be pursuing this as a career. It's, like I said, I was fortunate enough to get into the space, very early on in my career, but it's just something that I have such a passion for. And we just, there's still such a need, especially just across the ones, like I said, for, being able to tell the story, being able to understand the technology and and then actually demonstrate that, the execution of the technology and the approaches and connecting that back with business. And there's so much opportunity and there's so much need for it to be able to be done well. And it truly is a superpower. So just encourage you to continue on your path and And yeah, good luck in everything that you do. It's such a fun time to be here in this
Awesome.
space.
Mandy, thank you. There were so many gold nuggets throughout tonight. Like my brain is just spinning and I could talk to you for hours on this. But I really
It's fun
appreciate your
stuff.
time.
It really
No,
is.
on behalf of everyone that's here, thank you for spending the time with us and sharing your insights and your thoughts. Hopefully we energize some people about eBay as well tonight, not just analytics, and maybe you'll be getting a flurry of some resumes in for roles on your team. But I'd like to wish you a very happy holiday season and new year. And to everyone watching, on behalf of WGU, we wish you a happy holiday season, a happy new year as we enter 2023. And we look forward to seeing you on February 1st for episode 4 of our Data Analytics Dean's Fireside Chat. So on that note, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.